put up the slide.
Oh, hold on, I'm sorry. There we go.
And then turn it to the next slide. Welcome to all of each of you to the ICCR's webinar on best practices on ethical recruitment of migrant workers. We're so happy that you've been able to join us. There are over 250 that registered for this webinar, which I think shows the interest, the importance, the timeliness of this issue. There are companies on this line, there are investors, non-governmental organizations, governmental representatives, international institutions, and others who are deeply committed to really trying to make a major change. And what we're about, I think, is getting close to an inflection point in transforming the exploitive recruitment system from workers having to pay to obtain employment to employers paying that recruitment cost. Lots of work still needs to be done, but there are some promising practices emerging in sectoral initiatives, in individual companies, in trade unions working on the issue, all organizing to end worker paid fees. So today in this webinar, we have some excellent speakers to discuss how we can move forward together in more effective collective action. An ICCR lead on the No Fees initiative, representatives of an NGO that is focused on improving the lives of workers coming from Mexico and Central America, a multi-stakeholder organization that has worked for decades focused on global supply chain compliance, a leading company that has blazed a trail for others to follow and has learned in the process and is willing to share that related to how do you get started to deal with responsible recruitment in a complex web of agencies that are recruiting workers, and an ethical recruitment agency that's a pioneer in this space. So we will hold questions until the end. We'll ask you later to write your question in the box that's provided. And please put your name and organization, and if you're addressing the question to one of the panelists, that would be great too. And if we don't get to all the questions, please email me at dschilling.org, and we will get them on to the participants and the leaders. So first, let's turn to Valentina Gurney, who is the Associate Program Director of the No Fees Initiative here at ICCR. Valentina.
Thank you so much, David. I wanted to introduce the best practice guidance. Mary, could you please pass to the next slide? Firstly, saying that it's a significant report for us that we've been working for about a year, and it's of course a collaborative effort. So to present it, we decided to choose panelists that really are the people behind the report and explain the best practices from the field and in a very authentic manner. The guidance was developed in collaboration with Social Accountability International, which is a very special agency for me because I previously worked for them, but also because it's a certification body and a standard developer that has adopted the no fees policy in 2014 and started auditing companies on that standard, with ethical recruitment policy already in place. So of course it was natural that we contacted Social Accountability to help us understand how in the past couple of years, which is still kind of early days in ethical recruitment, the best practices have been implemented by the companies, and participating companies could share that experience with us. The other case studies were developed through ICCR shareholder work with the companies, and we are happy to have one of the companies that participated in the case studies on the phone with us. So 8 case studies total are featured in the best practice guidance, and we decided to look at different sectors to kind of be representative of the universe of the companies that we've been engaging over the course of the last 3 years that No Fees initiative has been running. These industries are agriculture, apparel, electronics, and food and beverage sectors. Needless to say, these are strategic industries for us because they're very high risk when it comes to recruitment of migrant workers. The risks are there. The migrant workers are coming from different places, and to be fair to the geographic scope of our best practice study, we are looking at a number of countries as well. We are featuring buyers and suppliers from India, from Thailand, from Malaysia, Taiwan, Mauritius, and even United States agriculture. The methodology that we use for the report varies from company to company. Most of you know how difficult it is to talk about risks such as forced labor, human trafficking in the supply chains. Not every company wants to disclose what they're doing and what are some of the challenges to the public. And we understand that, so we're very grateful for the companies that were able to participate in this study. But we also acknowledge in the fact that the studies are very different in nature. Some of them are based on shadow audits, and that's what makes them very comprehensive because we were able to gather the data, the recruitment fee schedules from the suppliers directly, or testimonies from the workers themselves from the numerous worker interviews that we've conducted. We also met the suppliers. We got some of the supplier feedback on implementation of ethical recruitment policy. As I mentioned, there were many worker interviews, over 50 in total that we conducted just in Taiwan. And previously, when I was doing a case study, field study in Thailand, food and agriculture and seafood industry, we also interviewed a number of migrant workers. The same goes for United States. I had a chance to work with a number of grassroots organizations in North Carolina to interview migrant workers there. We also use company feedback that we gathered through surveys, interviews, in-person meetings with management, all on policy implementation. And of course, we used the feedback from the S8000 auditors to really understand what are some of these best practices. Next slide, please. So how really, to talk about best practices, we really kind of need to understand what is the framework behind it. For the past 3 years, the framework that ICCR has chosen to work with investors and companies alike was the 3-pillar policy of ethical recruitment. And this is a very basic policy prescription that we use and we advocate for with companies that we would like to see in their codes of conduct in a very explicit way, what we call a forward-facing policy, something that stakeholders, investors, and customers don't have to look far to find. It has to be found on the website. It has to be found in the code of conduct of company. And the 3 pillars are, first and foremost, we start with the written contract because this provision has been in many codes of conduct for many years because it's a very basic kind of a 101 forced labor provision that deals with the fact that workers have to understand and be very clear on the terms of employment before they get the job. So the contract has to be done in a language that workers can understand, that will be signed by the worker and explicitly states what are the terms of work, what are the terms and conditions of employment. So that's number one. Number two would be the retention of documents. In many companies, we've seen that it's only kind of deals with passports and visas and such, but we expanded it to include also monetary deposits or any other collateral. So that pillar deals with the forced labor provision that basically, if it was not there, it would prevent workers from leaving the place of employment freely. If there are any kind of documents or monetary deposits or visas or any other things that are collateral to their employment. So by this pillar, employers should abide not to retain any documents or demand monetary deposits or other collateral as a condition of employment. Workers are not subjected to withholding of wages, any kind of personal belongings, identification cards, travel documents, and such, without their consent. And third, and perhaps the most challenging of these three pillars, is the ethical recruitment itself, the no fees policy, where no fees should ever be charged to the workers to full or in part for getting a job, for securing an employment. Next slide, please. So, of course, in 3 years from the launch of our No Fees initiative, we've made a lot of progress, and now we work with a universe of 71 companies across 6 sectors in food and agriculture, apparel, electronics, travel and hospitality, and also automotive. And now we'll look at how some of the leading companies are implementing these best practices. And this chart really shows you what we mean by the best practice implementation and how that progress may look like. I already mentioned that the first point would be the 3-pillar policy, adopting the forward-facing policy. And that really goes hand in hand with the mapping and risk prioritizing for the companies. And of course, the support from the top management to make those changes. And from there, we go all the way through direct recruitment to work with suppliers, to adopting auditing tools that address ethical recruitment, to compliance with the local law, which is all sometimes can be forgotten. And we talk in great detail about the recruitment fees and reimbursement. We have 2 columns here, and I would like to walk through them a little bit because through our work with the companies and supplier interviews and worker interviews, we've defined a number of fees that workers are usually charged. And the current recruitment model, the fee-free recruitment model, is in light blue and basically only deals with the fees that workers receive on the job. And some employers, some progressive employers, choose to reimburse that model. However, most fees are incurred by the workers before they secure employment in their country of origin. And this is something that cannot be discounted. The fees here, we'll list them as well, and we hope that the most progressive, the 100% compliance scenario in the future will be where the workers will be reimbursed for those fees as well. And of course, going beyond compliance here is when company assists suppliers and works with suppliers directly to cover the recruitment costs and establishes worker grievance mechanisms. And provides a little bit more than what is necessary by law to the workers, because we are, of course, dealing with the very vulnerable migrant worker populations here, and every little bit helps. And leadership cannot really say too little about that. It's perhaps one of the most critical learnings that we found in the course of our best practice guidance study is that a company alone can really not implement a policy like this. It has to be an industry-wide effort, and it has to be something that suppliers are already familiar with in order to implement well. So participating in the industry groups and working with standards such as SI 1000 is really critical here, because it really puts a common denominator for recruitment and puts the industry, gives the industry the same benchmarks so that we can all act together on this. Can we go to this next slide, please? Here again, the emergent best practices at a glance, and we go from mapping and the supply chain to identifying and prioritizing risks, to policy development, to, of course, 3-pillar implementation, building buyer and supplier relationship, which is critical in order to address some of the challenges. Sometimes you have to really hold hands and provide a little bit more guidance and training, all of those things. Appropriate supplier support, again, training here is critical. A transparent communication with suppliers, and of course the stakeholder collaboration that I mentioned. And I will stop here, and the purpose of this webinar is really to hear from the people behind the research, as we already mentioned. I would like to now pass the microphone to our colleagues from Contratados and Centro de los Derechos del Migrante, which is a worker rights organization based in Washington, D.C. and Mexico. And they will make a case for why addressing ethical recruitment is so critical. Over to you, Sarah and Evie.
Hi, everyone. As it's already been mentioned, we're from the Center for Migrant Rights, a binational nonprofit organization to remove the border as a barrier to justice for migrant workers, and we're very excited to be here. We'd like to begin with a testimony by Elisa Martinez Tovar, who is the leader of CDM's Migrant Defense Committee, a group of community-based leaders who organize and empower migrant workers to defend themselves and educate their co-workers. Elisa has been worked in the U.S. seafood industry under the H-2B visa program, where she has experienced several problems, including discrimination and recruitment fees. She also participated in the launch of our report, The Hidden Struggles of Migrant Worker Women in the Maryland Crab Industry, and that's one of our worker-driven policy advocacy to ban illegal recruitment fees and prevent recruitment fraud. This is your testimony.
Sarah, can you hear me? This is David Schilling. Could you get off speakerphone? I think it's going to be easier hearing you.
Unfortunately, we're not actually on speakerphone.
Oh, okay. All right.
The audio through the computer.
Excuse my intervention and continue.
No, it's fine. Do you want me to try to dial in? Is it too difficult to understand
No.
this?
Keep going.
Okay.
Okay,
Thanks. Sorry, David.
Okay, this is Elisa's testimony. My name is Elisa and I'm from Ciudad del Maíz in the state of San Luis Potosí in Mexico. In 2000, when I was 28 years old, I left family behind to migrate to the US for the first time. My parents and husband had also looked for work in the US because of the lack of jobs and opportunities in our country. I went to the local recruiter to see if she could find me a job. I knew she only placed women in crab picking jobs in the US. I got my H-2B visa after 3 long and expensive trips from my hometown to the US consulate in Monterey. And I finally left to go to work in Maryland. I paid for all recruitment and visa fees, in addition to travel expenses from my hometown to Monterey, and then from Monterey to Maryland. We'd been told we would live in a house provided by the employer. But when I finally arrived on the Eastern Shore, I realized I'd be staying in a trailer shared with 7 other women. Living conditions were bad. It was overcrowded, had roaches, and the second floor bathroom leaked onto the first floor. I still had to pay rent to my employer. Once I started the job, I realized there was simply not enough work for me. There was 1 month when I only worked for 1 week. I would sit at home waiting for more work, worried about rent payments to my employer, about how I would pay for food to eat, and whether I'll be able to send money to my family in Mexico. I also began to notice that men got paid more and worked longer hours. They would boil the crab while women would pick them. They would get paid by the hour while we would get paid by piece. We were always afraid of being sent back to Mexico if we didn't work quickly enough. In spite of unfair labor and poor housing conditions, I knew I couldn't leave. I was so worried about paying rent, covering my debt, including recruitment fees and traveling expenses, and whether there would be enough money to survive. I just couldn't leave. But now things are changing. We saw that there was a change with the women in the crab industry since we went to Washington. We had a report that was launched there, and it changed the situation for women. Since we launched the report, there were no costs. They didn't charge recruitment or visa fees. Afterwards, there were reimbursements, unlike before. Conditions have improved, and they are getting better every year.
So that's a little bit from Elisa. Obviously, this is one story out of hundreds or thousands that we've heard. And yes, in one case, a report that we published was able to ameliorate the situation and really make a difference for workers. But we're still hearing reports from hundreds or thousands of workers each year about illegal recruitment fees and other situations that the best practices report really addresses. So we're hopeful that with this kind of report, there may be more change and we'll continue to see better situations for workers. Next slide, please. So because we hear so many stories like Elisa's, we actually created a worker information sharing platform, a website, contratados.org, which is a platform similar to Yelp or Glassdoor for migrant workers that uses phone and web to change the balance of power. We also recommend the best practices suggested by ICCR, and we know that this is the purpose of the webinar, but we wanted to provide an example of one implementation that really addresses similar topics and one way that we gather information. So I'd like to give you some background to start with. Next slide, please. As you're aware, the tradition of migrating internationally for work is really long-standing. The process to do so under the H-2 visa program is often fraught with perils and uncertainty. Hundreds of thousands of workers have been charged fees for jobs that don't exist, or they don't get paid what they've been promised. This is why following these best practices is discussed in the report is so critical. Otherwise, workers are incredibly vulnerable to abuse. Next slide, please. We've seen and we expect to continue to see large increases in the H-visa program, which will leave significant room for more abuse. There's some numbers on the slide here that you guys can see that demonstrate kind of that 2015 to 2016 increase that was pretty dramatic. Next slide, please. So as a workers' rights organization, we really feel that the crucial point is that migrant workers are informed and empowered to make decisions about their own migration, and that employers on the other side need to ensure ethical recruitment. Next slide. As a result, tools like contractados.org, this best practices report, are directly changing the balance of power for migrant workers. And employers can really support that through implementing the best practices part. Yeah, if you could stay on that slide, that would be great. So to create a platform that was truly designed for workers, we ensured that workers were directly involved in the development of the contractados.org platform. Next slide, please. So the core functionality of contractados.org is to allow workers to anonymously and publicly share information in real time about working conditions with a range of stakeholders: other workers, civil society organizations, regulators, employers, and more. This allows for workers to report when they've paid or been asked to pay an illegal recruitment fee or transport cost. And the visual here on the slide actually shows pieces of the employer profiles. There's a star review system, and there's the ability for workers to share free text that then can be passed along directly in their own language. Next slide, please. This is another depiction of the same kind of worker profile, but the bottom line is that with the increase in the H-2 program, we believe that more workers will need to be informed about working conditions, and employers will need to be more vigilant about ethical recruiting. Throughout the review process, when they're submitting a commentary or feedback on a worker here, they're answering a series of optional questions that came out of our brainstorming sessions with workers on topics that were most important to them, including illegal fees. So that is a rampant problem. Next slide, please. Contractados.org also provides engaging Know Your Rights materials, both in visual and audio formats. These are organized by topics that workers expressed interest in, which includes fraud and recruitment. I don't know if you guys speak Spanish, but the website is also available in English, and you can see a couple of the different examples here. We also provide alerts through our Facebook page, which we have a number of followers on, and through the website. Workers are actually able to sign up with their email and phone number to receive alerts that way. That way we can say to workers, hey, there's fraud going on in your community, or workers can directly provide feedback on times that they have they've actually paid fees. Oh, I'm sorry, I think we're still on the last slide. Could you move to the next slide, please? Thanks. So here is actually two examples. On the left, you'll see an example of a worker review that was submitted saying that they actually paid fees that they shouldn't have. And on the right is an example of some of our information that we provide on how to prevent fraud in the communities. Next slide, please. We also have a blog that we write about, and we actually take guest blogs for. So you'll see Elisa's face is the fourth one there. And this provides timely information for workers on current events as well as practical resources. We feel like it's a really great way to connect and provide a little bit more in-depth information as well. Next slide, please. And our goal with contractdatos.org is to raise the worker's voice and to push for ethical recruitment. And that's why we think it's such a good fit with the best practices report. And we were really thrilled to be included today. So we'd be happy to provide any more insights from the civil society side of the conversation, and even maybe from the worker perspective, if that would be helpful. Next slide. And another opportunity that we might be able to provide is if anyone wants to reach a bunch of rogue workers, we do submit guest blogs on our website, and that's a way to reach thousands through that. So my email, in case you wanted to reach out to me, is Sarah, S-A-R-A, at cdmigrante.org. Again, that's Sarah, S-A-R-A, at cdmigrante.org. Thank you so much again for your time, and best of luck. Congratulations on the report.
Thank you, Sarah. That was so helpful. And now we turn to Ramona Moorhead, who's Corporate Programs Coordinator for Social Accountability International and one of the co-authors of some of the case studies. So Ramona, please, we enjoy hearing from you.
Hi, thanks, David. So I'm from SAI. We are an international NGO that focuses on corporate social responsibility and human rights in supply chains. While we're often most well known for being the owners of the S8000 standard, SAI really wears a lot of hats and runs multiple programs in training, capacity building, and supply chain segmentation. We're known as a leader in implementation, rooted in management systems, worker voice, and stakeholder dialogue. I manage our corporate programs, specifically working with corporate members, brands, clients, and their licensees and suppliers on measuring and understanding social impact throughout their supply chains. Oh, you can go to the next slide. So the issue of forced labor underlies multiple aspects of our work because it's cross-boundary, cross-sectoral, and deeply rooted in supply chains. We have companies that are SA8000 certified and deeply committed, but we also work with brands and licensees and suppliers, all at varying levels of engagement with the issue. And we felt like working on this handbook was a great platform to share those experiences. You can go to the next slide. So at ICCR's roundtable event in January of this year, collaboration across industries and sectors within a broader framework was echoed amongst the multi-industry attendees. SAI really supports this collaboration, and we're in the early stages of working with the International Organization of Migration and the Consumer Goods Forum on creating tools to help implement ethical recruitment. Many of SAI's recent programs are focused on moving to a smarter auditing system and towards a model of mutual buyer-supplier responsibility. We use a program called Social Fingerprint to analyze and identify risks at all levels of the supply chain, from the brand level to licensees and vendors and facilities. This approach helps our companies use Social Fingerprint results and audit data to identify efficient use of resources and target focus areas for increased capacity building. The program breaks management system down into key categories. So we adopted this approach when conducting research for the case studies that we contributed to the handbook. Next slide. So in the course of conducting interviews, oh, you can actually go to the next slide. So in the course of conducting interviews for the case studies, we found the following elements to be critical when implementing ethical recruitment hiring practices. So risk assessment and due diligence. All of the suppliers and buyers that we interviewed for case studies agreed that in-depth supply chain mapping was a crucial element for beginning to tackle the issue. This begins with looking at your supply chain, mapping your suppliers, and really analyzing that list, finding out where they're located, what the biggest spend is, and getting information from those suppliers on what is going on in their facilities. Once the company has mapped its supply chain, the next step is a supply chain risk assessment to determine where the risk factor for forced labor is the highest. So in the case study that we conducted on Princess Tuna, we saw that regular oversight of the company's recruitment agencies was also a key factor in due diligence. Prince's has been working with the same recruiting agency in Bangladesh for the past 15 years, and they've established a strong relationship with the agency based on really clear understanding of expectations and communications of procedures. They have a dedicated HR manager that travels to Bangladesh 3 times a year to interview migrant workers, and they also have a dedicated vendor assurance manager to manage its suppliers. All of the brands and suppliers that we interviewed also agreed that senior leadership commitment was crucial in implementing ethical recruitment policies. As once you start looking for something in your supply chain, you're going to uncover issues, and until they're resolved, there's going to be several unknown factors for a period of time. So having that buy-in from senior leadership to take the necessary steps to really tackling the issues is key. Also in the case study on Prince's Tuna, we found that making this commitment entailed a sizable cost shift when they committed to their new fee repayment model. Previously, the company paid agents a recruiting fee of about $150 for each worker. But once they conducted worker surveys, Prince's found that the workers were also required to pay the agency a recruitment fee. SA 8000 prohibits the payment of any fees by workers, so Prince's really had to make a sizable shift, which dramatically increased the cost of recruitment per worker. So leadership buy-in was really crucial to remain compliant with SA 8000. So after a company has developed a policy and has gone through all of the internal business units, it's crucial to ensure that all departments are aware of the policy update and procedural changes by aligning awareness amongst cross-departmental teams so that a consistent message is communicated to suppliers. This was a best practice that was echoed from HP in ensuring that social responsibility was fully integrated into their overall system for supplier management. They find it really important for suppliers to receive one consistent message from the company. So they include social responsibility as part of their overall system to manage suppliers. It's part of the same conversation about quality, price, availability, and the consistent messaging from all of these units really reinforces their commitment. All of the companies we spoke with also recognized that change can't happen overnight, and that there are financial implications that will take time. So providing adequate training and support to suppliers on how to implement new policies and procedures creates a two-way relationship that is crucial to success. When HP implemented their foreign migrant standard, they identified what resources suppliers need and really became a partner in providing that support to encourage improvement. They created a guidance document on how to transition to their direct hiring model, and they also developed a focused on-site audit used to understand where implementation of the standard was weak. And then based on the results of those audits, HP provides on-site coaching on how to make system changes, and they attribute this engagement as one of the major keys to success. And finally, measuring performance and incentivizing improvement. This is a key to creating long-lasting change, as you can't improve what you don't measure. So you can go to the next slide. So at the buyer level, SAI encourages companies to integrate a management systems-based approach throughout their entire supply chain. And the case studies really highlight how utilizing this approach can facilitate that change. Patagonia is customizing this incentive approach for each supplier. They're providing incentives to the suppliers making the most progress. To do this, the company's social and environmental team provides regular updates to its sourcing team to calibrate the supplier's progress. Patagonia identified that while they have strong, long-standing relationships with many of their suppliers, they typically only use a small fraction of any given supplier's capacity. So they've partnered with other buyers to incentivize change at the supplier level and have collaborated with other stakeholders, including governments and NGOs, to address the many dimensions of the problem. In line with engaging suppliers and buyers, HP also conducted a series of workshops in partnership with Verite, government representatives, and other IT companies for high-risk suppliers in Malaysia. The workshops created a space for suppliers to share best practices, which we really encourage. Obviously, the increased attention around forced labor and human trafficking in the past 2 to 5 years has been driven by NGOs, government, media, press. All of these actors have really played a role in refocusing the lens on what had been a deeply hidden issue. The past 2 years in our work, we have definitely seen an awareness shift from licensees and vendors that are further down on the supply chain. Obviously, communication and increased awareness around the issue is the first step, but there's still a lot of work to be done around implementation in terms of making progress on such a dire, crucial, and complex issue. So SAI really looks forward to our continued collaboration with the ICCR and other stakeholders to really influence change. And that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ramona. And now we turn to Brent Wilton, who's the director of the Global Workplace Rights Program for the Coca-Cola Company. Brent and Coca-Cola have been a leader in this space in terms of how a specific company can adopt the policies and begin to implement, train, et cetera. We'll hear from you, Brent, as well as to see this is not going to be changed overnight, and it needs tremendous collaboration with a whole range of other actors through sector initiatives, multi-sector initiatives, working with trade unions on a range of issues. So Brent, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, David, and good morning, everybody. If you could bring my first slide up, it would be great. So I think it's already been articulated very clearly that the work in this area is very much a journey, and I guess the start of our journey came about because of some work that we were doing in the Gulf states back in 2009, where it became apparent as we were doing audits for the first time in that region that there was an issue initially with regards to the withholding of passports. This led us as a company then to have a look at what the law provided for in these countries. And whilst it is clear that in some of these instances the law did provide for the withholding of documentation, it was not unlawful not to hold it. So the approach that we took was basically to take the negative of the approach to say, well, whilst you may be legally entitled to hold these things, you're not legally unentitled to hold them. So we did our law review. We then came up and put into our SGP, which is our Supply Guiding Principle Audit Framework, inclusions with regards to withholding of passports. We then undertook, of course, because you can't do this without training, to go through the region with our suppliers and make them aware that what we were asking them to do was not unlawful, what we were asking them to do was not onerous, but what we were asking them to do was the right thing to do. And as we started moving into that work, we also started to move into other areas with regards to issues around what could be the grounds for creating forced labour. And one of these was the issue of employment contracts, which has been mentioned before, that these are done truthfully, that they are clear expectations as to regards to the job that the person is going to be performing, that they're in a local language that the employee can understand so that they can enter into a discussion over their terms and conditions of employment and not be misled, that there are no recruitment fees, and we continue to develop this as we look for further grounds as people get quite inventive around how fees can be created, to keep coming back and saying that we will not accept recruitment fees, that the employer pays the costs of employment, not the employee. And of course, the other one being the access to personal identity documents, and increasingly looking at that in terms, as was mentioned by Valentina, other collateral documents, other collateral material that people may be asked to hand in. We saw some instances where passports were not being held, but then title deeds to land were being asked to be produced. So those sorts of things continually evolve, and you've got to continue to work on these issues as the material becomes available to you through knowledge, investigation, NGO sharing, trade union sharing, etc. And of course, this is a lot easier to do when you own the operation that you're dealing with. But the Coca-Cola Company is a network of independent bottlers, so we have to work through our bottlers as well in making them aware of what it is that we're trying to achieve and why we expect them to also align their behaviours to meet our expectations. And whilst we do supply guiding principle audits of our supply chain, We also do human rights audits of our bottlers in order to make sure that what we want is being replicated over time into their operations. The other challenge we have is that we have operations in 207 countries. We operate some global supply chains, which bottlers can enter into should they wish to take advantage of the leverage of a global supply chain buy, but they also undertake their own supply. So our supply chain is huge in terms of the way in which bottlers can source their own material locally, their own labor, etc., etc. Now, of course, 2009 was a point in time. It doesn't seem that long ago, but really in terms of where we're going on this human rights journey, it is quite a long way away. And we were also informed by what was the Executive Order 13627, which grew out of concerns around the federal government's use of contractors and the way in which their contracts could be or could not be helping forced labour. And this went through quite a number of iterations. Some of you on the phone will remember that. And it came into effect on the 2015, and that's when really we put into our audit protocol across the board all of these issues with regards to forced labour reduction and removal. We do a lot of auditor training on this to make sure that our auditors, when they're going in and looking at any of the facilities, understand exactly what it is we are wanting them to look for. This is done also through individual interview with employees, so it's not just a tick the box with the manager. And we've done training through Latin America and South Africa and Hong Kong, and we continue through our auditor engagements. Every year we try and do 2 regional auditor trainings to keep them informed of what our increasing requirements are with regards to this. For example, recently in Qatar, in our bottling operation there, which is one of the few that we continue to own at the moment, we now have employees being given their exit visa signed by the employer at the time of employment, so that there's no barrier to an employee leaving their work should they wish to do so. Other changes coming in as a result of government action. We've seen the changes in the US Tariff Act, which means anything coming into the US now that carries with it an allegation of child or forced labour can be stopped at the border. This is another emphasis for us in order to engage with our suppliers to make sure that they are clear exactly what they are doing in this space. We also have a human rights app, which is available free to anyone that wants it, that does a topic as well as a regional overview as to where we see risk of forced labour, which of course is endemic in human trafficking, and so people can use that to at least give themselves a first start. We're also, though, having to go a lot further into our supply chain. We are now doing 28 country sugar studies around the world through our major sourcing countries that looks at child labour, forced labour and land rights. Again, in order for us to get down to the farm, and this is the biggest challenge a company like the Coca-Cola company has, which is a largely agricultural purchasing company, is being able to have visibility of what is going on down at the farms. And these have been some initial studies that we've done using third-party experts engaging in local stakeholder dialogue in order to get a sense of what is going on. And what we're finding in many of those studies is that the migration is not external into the country, it's more internal migration. And we have to be alert all of the time in terms of those internal migration patterns, that we're not seeing similar practices around fees being charged, documentation being withheld, etc., as you would expect to see in a supply chain that is bringing people into a particular country. So that's a continual learning for us. Can we have the next slide, please? And this has been called out particularly well. I mean, this is the issue around collaboration. As I said, where you own something directly, you can actually have far more control, you can be more directive, and you can force things to align with what your expectations are. But the world's not like that in supply chains. And so we work as much as we possibly can with a variety of different groups. David Schilling and I are on the Institute of Human Rights and Business Leadership group on No Employee Pays, which is, again, an advocacy group, which is looking to raise the idea in people's minds that it's not appropriate for people to have to pay for their jobs. GBCAT, which is an organization that is now moving into the realm of BSR, which again is another focal point for company and peer review and discussion around key elements and evolving trends with regards to these issues. The Consumer Goods Forum is a very large platform that we're engaged with. There is now a social sustainability pillar within the Consumer Goods Forum that's looking at both social and environmental. I co-chair the social arm of this, which is looking at no employee pays, no retention of documentation, and clear terms and conditions of employment as a further means of catalysing amongst those large companies that make up the Consumer Goods Forum the fact that all of these companies are looking for the same thing from their suppliers. And so recently we did a training in Dubai, which brought together a range of multinationals. David and the ICCR were there, which was great, to show this united front. Because what is important, and I've committed the company to attend these because I want every supplier in that room to understand that what is being asked for them with regards to these issues around human trafficking is not an ask of one company. And that if any supplier in that room ever wanted to become a supplier to one of those other brands, including the Coca-Cola company, then they need to make sure that they are properly aligned with this. And this is what you'll see in the case studies that have come through from the report that Valentina was talking about. We were having a particular problem in Taiwan where we were a very small buyer of a company. In another instance in Taiwan where we were a large consumer from them, they were very able to come into line very quickly with us because we had leverage. But when you're a small buyer in a large company, you don't necessarily have that leverage. But when you can bring those other multinationals to the table who are also buying through that supply company, then you can really affect change. And we're going to do that again in Thailand in October and Malaysia in November. And my hope is that we will continue these regional approaches with other multinationals at the table to help us do that. AIM Progress is party to that. A number of you may be AIM Progress members. Again, there we have done some work with the SMETA audits to bring their content into line with what our expectations are around migrant labour, which is very, very important. And we're working also with the Migrant Worker Rights Network as we move forward to try and better understand how things are working in particular supply chains. And I think for any company on the call, being involved in as many networks as possible almost is a prerequisite for you getting the information you need to be able to understand where the risk exists in your business. We have our collaboration with the International Food Workers Union. We have a number of critical friends through NGOs, but it's important to get down onto the ground. And our sugar study work in particular has shown very clearly that there are a number of stakeholders which can be difficult to identify, but who can be very, very helpful to you in understanding what is really going on the ground in country. So we will continue this multi-company leverage wherever we can. We believe it's the only way to really start to move this issue generally rather than trying to do it one migrant worker abuse at a time. Mm-hmm. So thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Brent. That's really, really helpful. Now we're going to turn to Marie Apostal, who's the founder and CEO of Fair Hiring Initiative, ethical recruitment firm that has really changed the paradigm. Marie, are you on the line?
Yes. Can you hear me, David?
Yes. Great. Good. So we're open to hearing your presentation. We have about 11 minutes left to the hour, so if you might want to summarize a little bit, we can get to a few of the questions. So welcome, Marie, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, David. I just landed in Manila an hour ago. So hello, everybody. My name is, as I said, as David said, my name is Maria Apostal, and I won't do any more further introduction than that. I think the first slide on my first slide is basically self-explanatory, so I won't go into that. These are the key components of ethical recruitment, and I think what needs to be highlighted there is the fact that people need to understand if they're going into, if they're hiring workers from overseas or their suppliers are hiring workers from in countries, are hiring migrant workers, they need to understand what a good recruiter looks like. And I think there are a number of standards out there, like the Verite Ethical Framework for Cross-Border Recruitment, that defines that. So I won't go into that in a lot of detail. What is key, and I think it's been spoken about by other speakers, is the employer's pay policy, the importance of transparency, and the fact that if you are hiring through an ethical recruiter, you get merit-based selection of workers, because unlike other agencies that require workers to pay for their job, and where the first level of screening is whether the worker can pay, fair hiring is able to get workers that are actually suited to the job, because we take that screen out. So I'd really just like to focus on the three last slides, because I understand the time constraints. The slide on critical challenges. So we've been operating as a recruitment agency out of the Philippines, sending workers mainly to the Gulf. And our key challenges have been, I categorize them into three. And they all have to do with the fact that there is an uneven playing field. A lot of companies, a lot of employers hiring migrant workers have followed the status quo, meaning that they don't pay for recruitment costs. And if a company is not paying for recruitment costs, it's obvious that these costs are being transferred to workers. So our key challenges have been getting into the market, because we do only earn our revenues from employers. We don't charge fees to workers that are unwarranted. It's a bit, people always ask, what does it mean when you say zero fees? There are fees that can be charged, that we charge to workers, that workers cover. We don't charge them, but workers cover them, such as passport fees and some documentation like their police clearances, etc. But largely what I'm talking about are the fees, our service fees, which we don't charge to workers, and other fees that such as airfares, visas, medicals in destination countries, and other costs. We don't charge them. So it's difficult to go into a market when an employer says, "What I've been doing that forever. Other agents don't charge me anything, so why should I work with you?" So that's a key market challenge, that not enough companies are paying for recruitment costs. The other challenge that we face are regulatory challenges, and these mainly have to do with the fact that a lot of national governments, the licensing processes for agencies are such that they are created to stem the violations, legal violations of bad recruiters. So the barriers to entry in any country for an ethical recruitment is very high. Where bad players are able to get around these high barriers to entry and staying in the industry through corruption and other unethical practices, it hurts an ethical recruiter that will not pay bribes to enter the industry or to get their workers out. We found from interviewing agencies in Nepal, for example, who tell us who will pay for the costs of what we pay to government just to get one worker out. They have to pay $10 to $50 each for each worker just to get the worker through the government process. So those are fees that an ethical recruiter will not pay, and that again is part of the uneven playing field. That there need to be safe channels or transparent channels for ethical recruiters to access in order to stay on to be able to stay in the game. The other challenge that we're looking at is, of course, the ethical challenges. A lot of agencies that operate in the industry do so by not just charging workers, but the workers don't just get charged for what the employer has to pay, but the worker also is charged for all of the bribes that the agent has to pay the government to get the worker out. So it's the transparency issues, the regulatory issues, and the market challenges are huge. And I think one of the things that made us enter the market was the belief that we were telling companies, you have to use ethical recruiters, but there are not enough out there. And I think the reason why there aren't enough out there, there's not enough of a supply of ethical recruitment agencies, is because the market is not completely ready. I heard the last bit of what Brent was saying about bringing industry, driving business towards ethical recruiters. I think what's important, and I'm cutting everything short, David. So
yes, yeah. One more minute. I hate to put the pressure on you. Yeah.
Yes. So I think what we really need to do, and I'll just go straight to how to move forward, is we need to flip the market. We need to increase business demand for ethical recruitment. More company codes, more industry codes need to require an employer's pay policy. Otherwise, it's not viable commercially for ethical recruiters to enter the industry at all, considering that there are so many risks to being in that industry because of the regulatory requirements. We need to increase the number of private recruitment agencies operating in this space. And so that also requires regulatory changes in national governments. We need to participate in multi-industry accreditation programs that allow the market to view, that allow the profiles of the good agencies to come to the surface, so companies know who they're dealing with. And I know you've talked about the Responsible Labor Sourcing Initiative and all of that from the EICC. And I think it's important for us to advocate for more countries to ratify ILO Convention 181, which will then translate to national regulations being in sync with a zero fees or an employer's pay policy. And we need to make workers more aware at the point of origin that they have a choice. But right now, that is a lie, because of all the issues that I spoke about before. There are not enough options for workers who want to go through an ethical recruitment process because there are not enough players in the industry. And I think I'll end with that, David.
Boy, Marie, thank you so much. So we're going to keep this going for just a little bit more. There have been some questions coming in. Brent, are you on the line? There's a question from Australia. How do you engage government to change the law or practice that from, worker pays to the employer pays principle?
Yeah, well, I think the opportunity exists. I mean, doing it company by company can again be very time consuming and not necessarily highly effective. But working through representative business organizations is a crucial step. So the work that's being done by the International Organization of Employers with regards to the International Migration Organization is an important process by which we start to influence governments in terms of their behavior. In terms of local government, though, if you want to have a talk through, if you're in Australia, the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry is a group that I would be going to ask them what they are doing with government with regards to ethical recruitment. I would also be looking to see what other companies in Australia are interested in this, or to create a network in Australia to take this to ACCI to make it an issue for their agenda.
Great. Boy, thank you so much. So maybe a question for Sarah. how do we ensure that migrant workers really are able to exert their right to freedom of association? Sarah, are you there?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry, we're here.
Yes.
Can you repeat?
Yes.
Can you repeat?
How do we ensure that migrant workers really have the right to practice the right to freedom of association?
So I think it's difficult. I mean, I think that most of the workers that we work with are quite vulnerable. They may only be approached by one recruiter or employer for employment. And so even though we educate them on their rights, and even though we're here as support for them, and so are other organizations in some cases, it's often difficult to sort of create a system in which there really is a choice. Because even though a migrant worker chooses to migrate, it may be that in their home community there really is no economic opportunity, there is no other choice or multiple employers recruiting. So we've explored some different models in which workers would be able to compare opportunities, and you may see some changes down the road with our contractdatas.org platform. But ultimately, I think it comes into making sure that at the very least workers are informed, so that they can make a decision, or at least make an educated decision.
Excellent. Oh, thank you so much. So in terms of, there's a question related to what's the best way for investors? What's the role of investors in this issue? How to get involved? Do you want to begin, Valentina?
Well, of course, how can you start? You can, of course, be a member of ICCR, and we will guide you through the steps of what you need to do to approach a company. We'll develop specific talking points. We'll also develop research, such as this best practice guidance. But engaging with companies is really critical in this issue. In the past 3 years, we've been able to move over 70 companies on this issue, and now beginning to move from 3 pillars and beyond. Of course, without the consistent action and pressure, usually nothing happens, So, become a part of ICCR and be a part of the dialogue.
Great. Okay, so then the question of, in terms of the role of non-governmental organizations in this issue, one of the speakers want to address that, either contratados or CDM?
To address the NGO role in this environment?
What's the sort of focus and role of civil society and NGOs in moving this forward?
Yeah, so CDM, just as an example, we've been around for over 11 years. We provide advocacy support, meaning that we integrate with the federal agencies in the United States to try to help from a regulatory standpoint support some of these practices, these best practices in industry. We also provide legal support, so we either occasionally sue the U.S. government to ensure that workers' rights are being protected from a regulatory standpoint, or we assist sometimes federal agencies or workers themselves or other organizations to sue employers, and then to disperse funds, because it is quite a difficult situation to get millions of dollars in recruitment fee reimbursements, for example, to workers in the field here in Mexico. So we handle that. We also do outreach and pre-deployment trainings, so covering rights education for workers, that they can actually be informed about the things they should ask for, and the way that they should be treated, and all of the relevant kind of statutory requirements, as well as just sort of decent best practices in the industry. And then we're really here as a resource. So workers will call us at all different times of the day, and we have thousands of referrals that we can make to different organizations that help with specific types of abuse, or to lawyers in the US, things like that. So I think that, there's a lot of different services that NGOs can provide. Long term, we would love that there would be no need for NGOs to provide these services. We'd love to push the government to actually regulate the industry in such a way and to support employers and workers in such a way that all of that interaction really happens without the civil society. But I think at this point, we're seeing a lot of support coming from civil society, and particularly on the advocacy side and the training side and the education side and things like that.
Thanks so much. I think we'll take.
David,
yes.
Can I just add, from a company perspective, you need the NGOs. They are your eyes and ears, and critical friends are always welcome. So I always really appreciate the work that the NGO community is doing in this space, because it invigorates us and gives us the information we need to proceed.
Excellent, excellent. And Brent, could you? We'll have one more question. It goes to you. What is the sort of the business incentive and the added value of adopting an ethical recruitment policy and implementation?
How long have we got, David? I mean,
you have 30 seconds, and I know you can be succinct. I've seen it.
There's a business case to do the wrong thing. There's no doubt about that. But the business case of doing the right thing is simple. What we're asking is the right thing to do. And with regards to an employed workforce that is subject to debt bondage, abusive conditions, et cetera, you've got no productivity, you've got no loyalty amongst your employees. So to continue to try and think that having people paid and be indebted and be debt bonded to come into your workforce is not a good thing in any business case scenario. And simple as that, just stop doing it. It's just the right thing to do is to make sure the employer pays for the costs of recruitment.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, we're going to end it there. Now, there are other questions, so we're going to take those and email them to the speakers so that everyone gets their questions answered. And if there are any additional ones, please, again, contact me, dschilling@iccr.org, and we will get them to the speakers. Just a couple of quick announcements. We're going to be getting to all of you that have signed up the best practices report this afternoon, the recording link for the webinar, because some have had a little bit of a hard time hearing. And our hope is to release this best practices report more publicly tomorrow, but we commit to getting it to you today. We're very appreciative of your participation. This is a tremendous group. We, as I said earlier, have companies and NGOs and investors and some government folks, international institutions. We have an opportunity, I think, to really find more effective ways to work together. Many initiatives are taking place, but there's also a beginning of trying to collaborate and converge some of those initiatives. And I do believe that we're coming to a critical point that can move this forward, and it isn't too soon. These are some of the most egregious human rights violations that we can imagine. So thanks for your participation and also for your commitment to this issue. And we look forward to working together as we address this issue in the future. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.